Hi everyone, welcome to another Wednesday workshop. Today we have an amazing guest speaker who will be talking through healing trauma and childhood trauma. So Shane, would you like to introduce yourself and take it away?
So my name is Shane Haron. I'm known as the anxiety specialist, and I kind of fell into this kind of work almost by accident. It wasn't until a couple of years ago that I kind of even knew I had anxiety or even experienced anxiety myself. I was probably someone, they called it like very high functioning anxiety. So I kind of never really recognized I even experienced it. And it wasn't until I was experiencing panic attacks and, one day I was just sitting at home and heart was beating at my chest and I couldn't breathe. Felt like someone was sitting on my chest and I didn't feel right, but at the same time I wasn't outwardly panicky because I'm not a massively panicky person. So in my eyes, I was like, I'm not one of those anxious people because I didn't think like I could fit that type of person. But I was starting to get more and more alarmed. I was speaking to my other half and I didn't want to call an ambulance because I didn't want to make a fuss. And later on, I've realized that this is a trait of someone who does experience anxiety, not wanting to kind of express how they feel. And ended up speaking to NHS Direct, and they said, look, just get yourself down to A&E as quick as possible. Got ourselves down there. They done all the heart tests, all the ECGs, all the EKGs, done some blood tests. And said, look, your heart's absolutely fine. Your heart's absolutely fine. We think you just had an anxiety attack. I think you just had a panic attack. And so that was like the first time I'd ever kind of been consciously aware that I was maybe experiencing some level of anxiety. And then this led me to, kind of like pondering it for a couple of months and not really kind of doing much about it because I felt a bit kind of silly. Didn't really want to, it's not really something that we could even speak about. And I'm going to my my GP and he essentially just wanted to give me antidepressants and literally said, take these and come back in 6 months' time. And growing up and seeing my mum on antidepressants and knowing that it wasn't really like a solution, I kind of didn't really want to go down that route. So I kind of felt a bit let down and I then explored everything there was to know about anxiety in terms of every books there was out there. One of my friends at the time, he was studying his psychotherapy and hypnotherapy course. Bear with me, hopefully you didn't hear too much of that barking. And he started playing, he was just playing around. And then as we were kind of mucking around, I could feel my state shifting. So I was like, this is quite interesting. There must be something to this. So I kind of I've done loads of hypnotherapy courses, and then through meeting people on these hypnotherapy courses and finding out what the best courses, the most recommending courses that they recommended were, started doing more of those courses, started working with clients. And at this point, my anxiety had sort of come down quite a bit. It wasn't really a massive issue for me, but I started to see certain clients that was experiencing anxiety, and they'd be telling me things that were like the issues that they were facing or the problems they were facing. And I was like, I've got that thing. I'll do that. And I started recognizing myself in my clients. So I started thinking, God, there's probably a lot more to this, what I'm experiencing than what I probably understand. So it led me to kind of dive into more of the kind of trauma side of things and understanding nervous system and how everything plays a part. Then I started specializing in more of the kind of trauma focused approaches. So typically when you're working with trauma, you need a kind of bottom up approach. So a lot of psychosensory exercises. Now these are exercises that use your senses, typically your sight or touch, to change your psyche, to change the way you kind of think and feel about certain things. Then I kind of essentially really understood trauma the more I understood the nervous system. And the more I started understanding things, I started studying with people like Peter Levine, Bessel van der Kolk, Gabor Mate, all the kind of experts in trauma in the world. And the more I kind of understood it, the more I recognized and understood myself. It really made me self-reflect and realize that, we all kind of assume we had a good childhood. Nobody would have ever, I'd never have said that I had a bad childhood or anything like that because I never experienced anything dramatic or drastic in such a way. But this is why trauma is so misunderstood. Everyone thinks trauma is just like the big traumas, like war, abuse, rape, and these kind of things. But essentially trauma it's like an emotional wound. So same way that if you had a physical wound and then it'd be quite sort of sensitive, and when it would heal, it'd be scar tissue and it'd be very rigid and inflexible, and it may still be sensitive over time. It's kind of like that with your emotional wounds. And then with trauma, you got to think of it as like, it's not so much what happens to you, but what doesn't happen to you after. So when we feel a certain way, and if you kind of let go of the idea of the word trauma, if you just think that anytime that you experience a level of emotion or you experience some feeling, all of our emotions are just energy emotions. So the idea is that we experience our emotions, we would express it, and it would finish its cycle. Now, the problem is when we don't feel safe, we don't feel safe to express what we're feeling. All of our feelings and our emotional expressions are for us to kind of notice it and recognize it so we could then address our needs, or for us to express it, someone else could address our needs. And that's the same reason why babies cry. Babies don't always cry because they just need feeding or, changing. They also cry when they kind of feel unsafe, or they feel like they can't sense or smell a parent or someone who's around them to keep them safe. So the more I kind of understood this, the more it kind of led to me kind of working on my own trauma. So I've never actually kind of worked with a therapist myself one-to-one for the kind of trauma stuff. I've worked with therapists with the top-down stuff like talk therapy, counseling, things like that. But I never really felt like it really did anything, because as much as your logical, rational adult mind can understand things, it doesn't really help heal the wounded child that's inside. So the way it kind of happens is like this. Imagine if you're born 100% whole. So you're born your true, authentic self. You're very expressive. You see babies, if they want something, they cry, they express themselves. If you see a toddler, happiest toddler in the world, when they're happy, when they're sad, it's the worst thing in the world. When they're angry, they throw the biggest tantrum. Now, this is because we're very, very expressive. And then at any point where we're going through life and anything that we experience which is new, there's an element of uncertainty. We don't know whether this is a safe thing or unsafe thing. So same way that if you was to do any new things now as an adult, there'd be a level of anxiety there because your body just doesn't know how to relate to it, how to interpret this thing, this experience. So you can imagine as a child, pretty much every experience you're going through is very new. And this is the same thing with certain emotions. So when we experience certain emotions, such as things like more kind of overwhelming things like guilt or shame, typically they're going to be in relation to the kind of people that are closest to us and around us at the time, which is typically our parents. So when we're experiencing this, say if we've done something wrong, we're being disciplined and we experience that level of shame, we then don't have the nurturing that we need from the parents, because on some level they're trying to discipline us and tell us something's wrong, just from the way that parenting's been passed down. So what happens is when we experience a certain level of emotion and we don't feel safe, because our nervous system isn't regulated, because we're still activated or still kind of triggered, we suppress it and we hold it inside. Now that part of us splits off, and in that part of us in that moment, there'll be a certain emotion that you're feeling, and there'll be a certain belief or perception in that moment. So say, for example, it could be anything, it could be something like you come home from school with, your something that you've drawn or something you created in nursery, and you go to show it to your dad or something, and he's just really stressed out and he's really busy, and he kind of just doesn't even engage in you, and he just kind of blows you off. Says, "Oh, not now, just leave me alone. Just show me another time," or something like that. And it could be something like completely innocent as that. But in that moment, the child feels rejected and the child feels hurt, and their perception in that little 3-year-old's mind, with the the level of understanding they have, is that I'm not loved, or daddy doesn't care, or anything like that. And in whatever that perception is, that part of you then breaks off because it didn't feel safe enough to express it. And then it lives in our subconscious. And then as we're growing up, we have many of these different parts which create patterns. Now from that pattern, we will then have, maybe certain behaviors or certain strategies going forwards to try to prevent those things. And as we get older and we have a lot of these, maybe hundreds, if not thousands of patterns of unresolved things, there could be tiny different things like that, but they will play out in terms of our adult life in our emotional responses. So when we get emotionally triggered, it's very rarely all about the experiences that we're having. If we've, say for example, if it was something like, say, anger, we felt really angry at something. And, sometimes I used to do this where, years ago, if someone sort of cut me up and was being a bit of a dick in front of me in the car, I would literally jump out of the car and try and pull people out of the car. As mad as that sounds, like to me, that's absolutely nuts now, but that was the level of anger that I would experience. And it's because whatever that feeling is, say for example, if it is anger, you're experiencing your lifetime's worth of that emotion. And if that wounded child that's sitting inside you, it's going to look out for any opportunity to play that part. It's going to look for any opportunity to express what hasn't been expressed. So this is where we sometimes will jump to certain conclusions or to certain patterns. And say, for example, if it was like, he doesn't care about me or something like that, often in our relationships, this is what our mind would jump to when we have very small bits of information, but we'll get emotionally triggered and jump to a certain sort of perception. And this is often because the perception that's happening in that moment is probably not the very first time we've had that perception or we've had that feeling. So this means a certain pattern's being triggered. Now, this pattern's being triggered, it's going to be a kind of build-up of all the times we've also experienced either that emotion itself or that pattern, and that's why it feels quite overwhelming. But because we never learn how to work through these patterns or how to actually process them, they never really get to change. They never really get to heal. And the reason why it keeps coming up is because that inner wounded child is begging for our attention. And this is almost like, this is why you'll attract it into your life. So subconsciously, you'll be making the choices to attract these situations and attract these kind of people. And they would say that you'll attract the kind of your partner, same as kind of like your parent, of the unhealed sort of stuff that you've got to try to sort of deal with. They say you kind of like marry your mum or you marry your dad. And this is because we have these unresolved childhood kind of wounds. And with that, we only seek, because it's a childhood wound and we didn't get the nurturing we needed. So in an ideal world when we were younger, we'd experience what we experienced. And if a parent was deeply attuned to our needs at a time, same way that you know when someone's feeling a bit off, or you just know their energy is a little bit not quite right. If a parent was deeply attuned at any point, when we felt that way, the parent would have said, it's all right, it's okay. This feeling is normal. What you're feeling right now is completely normal to feel. You're safe, it's okay. Everything's gonna be fine. I love you. And then the child would have gone, ah. Then they would have got regulated. They would have got nurtured in that moment. Then they would have felt safe to kind of just be with that feeling and express it rather than suppress it and a part of them split off to deal with it at another time. And this is why, as adults, we're attracting these scenarios into our life. That's why you see sometimes where you see this, like say, for example, a girl get into like an abusive relationship for like 4, 5, 5th time in a row. And you're like, how are you finding these kind of people? And it's because your subconscious is looking to attract these scenarios to trigger the imprint, trigger the pattern. But the problem is when we heal the replay, say for example, in what you're sort of going through today, most people would typically go to therapy for that. Say my current relationship's happening, this is happening, blah, 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 and the emotions that I'm feeling about it. But the problem is, because it's a replay of an earlier imprint, working on the replay doesn't really have much of an effect. It doesn't change the pattern. So when we sort of regulate, if emotions too high, we bring it down or bring it up. That's kind of what we mean by regulation. So if you just regulate the replay, you can bring it down and regulate the nervous system and not feel too overwhelmed by it. But it's not going to stop it from happening again. It's not going to heal the wounded inner child. Now, because it's the wounded inner child typically in us, and that's how we learned, say, for example, certain feelings were bad to express. Say, for example, if it is anger, and we got sort of told off for, pushing our little sister off a bike or something like that, and then we got disciplined or hit for it, we would have got learned in that moment. That small little learning experience would have been anger's bad. Do not express anger because, anger, if I do so, something bad's going to happen. Or even where, I've kind of said to my nephews years ago, before I even knew what I knew now, when they've been upset, I've gone, oh, come on, no need to cry. Come, big boys don't cry. And we just, we do this innocently. We do this positively intended. It isn't always negatively intended. But when we're in that emotional state, when our brain's like a sponge in those early learning years, my nephews may have learned in that moment, oh, men don't cry, big boys don't cry. So expressing my emotion is bad. So it leads to more further suppression. And anything that we suppress eventually just builds up inside us because we only have, we have like a emotional tank inside us where we can suppress stuff into it. But eventually that tank starts to overfill. That's when a lot of our patterns start to play out. That's why in times like this, when we are sort of super stressed or, we have a lot more sort of stresses going on, our ability to cope and have a handle on that starts to diminish, and we start spinning out with a lot of our patterns and things that we're experiencing. And that problem with healing the inner child is that because it's an inner child that didn't get nurtured, often we're seeking other people to nurture ourselves. So we seek partners, or we seek friends, or we seek therapists even to heal, do the healing for us, because that's what we kind of didn't get received. We didn't get the nurturing we was looking for. But the problem with that is that because it's a part of us that lives in our subconscious, it's not so easy to address that. And at the same time, it then reinforces the parent to child kind of mentality, or the parent to child role. What we need to do is we need to be that parent for ourselves. So our current adult rational self that we're currently kind of experiencing, we need to be the one that nurtures the inner child. And that's why sometimes when we get triggered emotionally, you won't feel like your full adult rational self. It's because you're essentially being regressed back to your younger wounded child self, of whatever that pattern may be. Some clients will even, regress back, and as soon as they're emotionally triggered, the whole speech will change, the whole language changed, how the words they're using and how they're speaking completely changes. And it will sound like they're being a baby, because essentially that's what they're regressing back to. But how we heal this, we need to think, you have to think of a bottom-up approach. So when I say bottom-up approach, most therapies are a top-down approach. The CBT, talk therapy, counseling, all the rationalizing, all the thinking aspects is all a top-down approach. So you have to think of it as, if imagine your brain split up into three different parts. So you've got your rational thinking part, which is like your prefrontal cortex area. Then you've got your emotional part, which is like your limbic system. Then you've got your survival part, which is like your brainstem, the oldest part of your brain. Top-down therapy goes thinking, emotions, survival. So as anyone knows, when you are feeling anxious, or you're feeling triggered or emotionally triggered, your rationality goes out the window. So you stop even being able to think logically or rationally about things. So the top-down approach, trying to change your thoughts to change how we feel, we know is essentially useless. Because often what happens, people go to talk therapy, they'll do all the kind of rationalizing, they'll do all the understanding, and their adult rational mind can understand it and make sense of it and accept it. But it still doesn't change the emotional triggers. It doesn't change the subconscious patterns, because it's just on a deeper level. So the bottom-up approach, or how you ideally approach for trauma, is first create safety. So learning how to regulate. Now we can only create safety through the body. It's not going to be something that we can just do through the mind. That's why you can have anxiety. Your body can be going, into your fight or flight, that sort of panic, even having like a panic attack. And your rational mind can be looking around and even knowing you're safe, and your body's just taking over. So we want to be able to regulate, then we have to do this through the body. So the easiest way to do this is either through self-soothing, through kind of like sensory kind of touch. Now, one of the therapies that I'm sort of qualified in is something called havening, and it uses sensory touch. Touch is very therapeutic, and it uses your hands to kind of either touch your kind of like face, your upper arms, your hands, but essentially rubbing your hands on any part of your body. And what this neuroscientist found was that it creates these delta waves in your brain, the slowest brain waves that your brain produces. And when we trigger a certain pattern, when your amygdala lights up, when we create these delta waves, it opens up these calcium channels, and in the AMPA receptor that gets released actually disintegrates in itself through the delta waves and all these kind of like things that happen in your brain. And that's kind of like the scientific kind of side of things. But in my opinion, I do feel like touch is very therapeutic anyway. If I was to hug, a stranger, essentially I'm saying that I'm okay and you're okay and we're okay. We're safe. We all need to be held. And just to hold yourself, to have that space where you're holding for yourself, that's what is first required to then access the emotions. Because if we don't feel safe, we're going to feel overwhelmed by what we feel. Because when we learn these emotions, when we're younger, when we were a child, maybe we didn't feel safe to experience it. So we learn that this emotion was dangerous. Now you have to imagine that nothing that we learn when we're born, we don't know anything. We have no idea what things are good, what things are bad, which is safe, which is dangerous. And that's the same way how certain responses can get wired. So same way that, you could be 5 years old and you're in your kitchen and you've never seen a spider before in your life. You don't know if a spider's good or bad. And your mum sees it and she freaks out, jumps on a chair and acts as if this thing is going to, kill her. And then you learn and your body learns, oh my God, spiders are dangerous. So we're learning these things all the time. So when we learn that these emotions are unsafe, that's why we have to go bottom up. We create safety first. Create safety in the body through the sensory touch, or my other sort of favorite method is through breath work, extending the exhale and being at peace, or just just really slowing down the exhale and activating that parasympathetic nervous system, and even just building up that resilience. A lot of people are so activated so stressful time, they never really go into that safe parasympathetic mode. So you'd first create safety. This is very hard for people to do on their own sometimes, and this is where working with someone trauma-informed can help. Because when someone's well-regulated themselves, say our nervous system's always speaking. So if I'm in a room with someone, even if I'm sort of speaking like now, even if you're listening to this at a later point, your nervous system is going to be able to hear through my tonality, from the words, from how I'm speaking, where I'm at with my nervous system state. Whether I'm at a kind of safe, kind of relaxed and regulated place, or if I'm feeling, very activated and triggered in a sympathetic activation, or if I'm even in a shutdown, in a dorsal vagal freeze kind of state. So our nervous system is speaking all the time. So when we are working with someone who's not trauma informed, say like a kind of therapist, and they're not being fully present, maybe they're bringing into the situation their own feelings, or they're thinking about something else. Or when someone's telling their story where it's, a very emotionally invoking story, it's triggered emotion in them. Now, essentially what's happening then is that their body's being triggered, and then their emotions are then getting involved, and they can't hold space for the client to be able to actually express what they're expressing, because it's become almost too muddied, because now there's too much emotion in the situation. So being able to stay regulated is being able to hold space for someone. And when someone else can hold space for you, it's like an inviting thing to essentially be held. And that allows someone to then be able to explore whatever their kind of emotions are with it. Then we explore the emotions, and then we'll, if we trigger the thoughts and whatever it is, the thinking is only done as far as it needs to be to trigger the response. The way most talk therapy work is they'll talk over it and over it and over it and over it again. The activation will happen in the body, but they'll do nothing with that charge, that emotional charge that's now being triggered. So people end up having, they get really emotional, but nothing's being done to actually change the emotional response. Versus with a bottom-up approach, with a trauma-informed approach, you would trigger the response, or you'd only think about what you need to think about to trigger the emotional or the body response. Typically, this is going to be a visceral response in your stomach or your chest area. And we would then explore it. We'd explore what you're feeling, where you're feeling it, maybe how strong that feeling is. Typically, we'd use maybe a current scenario or an earlier or an imagination thing. Like typically anxiety is about a forward thinking situation. So when you think about that thing, or you remember whatever you're sort of remembering, it triggers a response, and then we'd explore it, and we go, probably this, like I say, sometimes it's a replay. Sometimes it's not always the first time you felt that feeling, is an earlier imprint. So we always want to go back to the earliest time that we felt that feeling. So we'd ask a few questions. Was this feeling remind you of? When was the earliest time you remember feeling this way? And how did you learn this feeling? These kind of things. And the idea is, when we ask these questions, it's a passive question. So it's not an active thinking thing. It's not sitting there going, when I was 4, then this happened. It's nothing like that. It's more of just a passive thing where you're just putting it out there and seeing what comes up. Then often the memory will come up. Typically, we're looking for a memory on the age of 10 or the age of 8, because that's when a lot of our conditioning happens. And that's where we kind of get to our kind of core inner child kind of wounds. Then I'd typically then get the client to open their eyes, make sure they're feeling safe, because we know now where we're needing to go, and then just regulate them if they need to. If they feel, a bit dysregulated, it's absolutely fine. We can work through that then. Then we'll go through a few rounds, as we call it, where we use these psychosensory techniques, and we'll either typically move away from it initially, so we don't have to be focused on the situation. I may get them to count to, 30 while doing some of the techniques, or I may get them to recite, their favorite recipe. It doesn't matter. When we trigger the response, it opens up like a 5 to 10 minute window for us to create these delta wave activation to change the emotional charge and release some of it. Now, sometimes this will get it down quite a bit, but it won't fully resolve it. And typically it's because the inner child needs some nurturing. So through my own process that I've created, I would then go back into that, wherever that early memory was, with the client looking at it from an outside perspective. So they're looking at it from a third person view. So they're looking at that younger child self. And sometimes it's easier to observe from an outside perspective, because you're seeing it disassociated. So it's easier to kind of just be in that situation, so you're not feeling the emotion as strongly. But at the same time, you're then witnessing the facial expressions, the body language, the emotional expression of your younger self. And you can see it for your younger self, what they're feeling. Because often when, a client will go back to it, they go, oh no, I'm fine. Because the adult rational self is like, okay with it. The adult rational self has accepted it. But the younger child self hasn't had that, that healing, hasn't had that nurturing. And then I'd instruct the client to nurture the younger self. They will be doing the exercises, the psychosocial exercises themselves, but also doing it to the younger self. And then telling them everything they need to hear in that moment. Often it's just to kind of give them space to express themselves and feel safe enough to express themselves and just say how they're feeling. And then break down, once we clear the emotions, then we'll rewrite the story. Because whenever we learn from an experience that's emotionally charged, we're only seeing it from one perspective. We're only seeing it from a very emotionally kind of blinded or emotionally fueled perception. That's why it feels so subjective when we kind of get triggered. We take things personally when people are doing certain things in our life. We get triggered, we take it personally because we're seeing it from one-sided view. Once we clear the emotions, we can see it objectively. And then there's an opportunity to then learn the lesson that we maybe should have learned than the lesson that we did learn. So going back to, giving the homework to your dad or something, or your schoolwork, whatever, we would have probably have learned that, maybe dad didn't have the time management skills or, he didn't really kind of understand, he was just too busy, versus learning that I wasn't good enough. And this is how we break core beliefs as well. So all of our core beliefs are powered by our emotional response to it. The emotions that we're feeling is what fuels the belief as well. So this is essentially how we would work. And then after, typically take 20 minutes or so, 10 to 20 minutes to work on a certain pattern. And this is how we would approach healing the inner child. If it's something that was sort of basic, like just you change the emotional response to something that embarrassing that happened, last week, it's typically a lot quicker to take a couple of minutes. But we would use different psychosensory exercises based on the approach. And hopefully that makes sense, but hopefully I've explained the process well. But this is why the top-down approach doesn't really work, and we need that bottom-up approach. When someone's trauma-informed, they're equipped with these psychosensory exercises, we can create that safety to actually explore yourself. And then when you can explore yourself and explore your feelings safely, then you can actually express what you didn't feel safe to express. This isn't often what it's about. Trauma isn't always, these worst case scenarios or these big traumas. Sometimes there's loads of these little traumas where we just didn't feel safe to express what we felt. So we didn't get the nurturing we needed based on the emotions that we felt at the time. So by going back to those early experiences, we get to give ourselves the nurturing that we needed. And when that happens, that part of us that broke off gets an opportunity to heal and then reintegrate back into ourselves. And then we become more of our true 100% authentic self. So then when we're going through life, we can maintain our adult mind, rational adult mind, rather than being triggered in these certain situations. So once you've changed the pattern, it's healed permanently. It will never get triggered again unless there's a different aspect of it being triggered. So I think that's roughly been about half an hour. Is that kind of all making sense to you, Alex?
That was amazing. I actually wrote down so many questions. I just want to open up the floor to anyone else to see if anyone had any questions for Shane. You can come off mute or you can write in the chat box.
I don't have a question, but I have to say thank you because you referred like the last thing you were talking about, like the homework and the dad and the mom. There was a particular situation that I got reminded of, and it was on the back of my mind. So I really got to say thank you.
Cool. Well, maybe if we've got time, we could work through some of these things.
I was doing it while you were talking.
Yeah.
And I've done a regression in the past to work on my traumas. Actually, I'm still in the phase of shadow work, and so a lot of layers are being, how should I say, put out or eliminated. And this is one of the deepest ones, maybe. So, and you reminded me of it, and I know how to work through it because I can kind of go back and see myself. So I gotta say thank you.
So maybe we'll go through some of the techniques that I use, you know, the actual practical skills. So there's a number of ones that I use. I'm trained in TFT, like the old school kind of tapping thing. Tapping is one of those psychosensory exercises. Blast, which is a variation of EMDR, an advanced blast. IEMT, which is another eye movement thing. The eye movement stuff are great. And then the having, which is the kind of psychosensory touch thing. So essentially we want to create that sort of safety. So if you kind of imagine you as kind of rubbing your arms up and down from your shoulders to your elbow, or rubbing your face, or rubbing your hands, or even one of my favorite ones is just kind of like rubbing your thighs up and down. This creates these delta waves. So essentially you would, if you felt safe enough, you'd go back to whatever that memory was, you'd bring it to mind, and you'd explore what you're feeling. So would you want to go through it now? Just if you wanted to kind of work for it?
That's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, so if you just close your eyes and if you just bring that to mind, how do you notice your body responds? How does your body react?
At first, kind of anxious.
Anxious? And where do you notice that anxious feeling in your body?
Stomach.
In your stomach?
Yeah.
So if you just keep rubbing your arms, your shoulders to your elbows. And is this when you're in this memory, this is when you're feeling this anxious feeling?
Hmm?
You're feeling anxious just being in this, just triggering, thinking about this memory?
Because of the situation, but
Okay.
In it helps a lot.
So just keep rubbing your arms with me, and I want you to just open your eyes for a moment. And then when you go back into the scene, I want you to kind of observe it from like an outside perspective. So you imagine you're looking at the younger self. So how old would you have been in this memory?
I was in a corner, and my mom was yelling at me because of the homework.
Perfect. So I want you to just picture the scene. Just close your eyes. And just imagine you're looking at the scene play out. So you're seeing your mum yell at you for the homework. You're seeing yourself in the corner. I want you to just observe your younger self and just tell me, just looking at his facial expressions, his body language, just tell me what he would have been feeling. Afraid. So I want you to just imagine it's just you and him. So just freeze everyone out of the scene and just have just you and him, just have him in front of you. I want you to just start kind of stroking his arms or even just holding him. And I want you to just tell him everything he needed to hear in that moment. Tell him it's okay to feel scared and that you know now looking back as an adult that maybe your mum was just having a bad day or maybe she just didn't understand things or maybe she just wanted to do well for you. That's why she was kind of just moaning at you for your homework. But when you just let him express himself, ask him how he feels, and when he feels whatever he says, just have that conversation with him. Tell him it's okay to feel that way. And just come for him and just give him everything he needs in this moment. Just keep going until he feels okay. Keep going until you notice he feels a bit better and his body language starts to calm down a bit. At the same time, just keep rubbing your arms. And just giving him everything he needed in that moment. Just give him all the nurturing, all the love. And just tell me when that younger you starts to calm down. You may notice when you're connected with him that emotions may arise for yourself. It's completely normal. Just let yourself feel whatever you feel. Imagine you're just taking those feelings from him, those feelings that he didn't feel safe to express. Imagine you're just going to take it from him and you're going to express it for him and just let it all go. Knowing you're safe, knowing you're okay. You know, sometimes you can feel a bit vulnerable, just going into your feelings. So you can just submit into them. And just staying with this moment. How's the younger you responding? How's he feeling?
Well, he calmed down,
Mm-hmm.
but in the end, it's like he reacts, or the reaction is like she always does it. She never understands.
So he feels misunderstood.
Yep.
So
There is a feeling of misunderstanding all through, like before that moment.
so what's that? Is he feeling any feelings at the moment?
Most of all, I'm trembling right now. So
Okay. So with this feeling, I want you to ask yourself, is this a familiar feeling? Because you mentioned it's happened a few times with your mum.
yes,
Was this a familiar feeling?
yes, it was.
So we always want to go back to the earliest imprint. So just ask yourself, be really curious and just go, I wonder how I learnt this feeling. When was the earliest time I can remember feeling this way? And see if it leads you anywhere. Anything come up? So maybe a certain experience come to mind?
Blurry memories.
That's absolutely fine. So just open your eyes for a moment. If you start wiping your face like this, and can you humor me? Yeah? So I want you to just hum Twinkle Twinkle Little Star and I'll do it with you. Yeah? Okay. So hum with me. Okay, shoulders and hands like this, so if you're watching on your screen. Now I want you to just count from 60 backwards in threes. So you're 60, 57. Just keep counting backwards. So 60, 57, and 54. Keep going. That's it. Just keep counting aloud for me so I know where you're at.
It's backward into in three, right?
Yeah, just three. So 60, 57, 54, 51. It's meant to be difficult, by the way.
Yeah.
It's, not meant it's done on purpose.
Yeah.
So doesn't have to be perfect. You're doing well.
Great.
That's it.
45.
Perfect. Keep going.
42.
That's it. Just keep rubbing your arms.
39. 36.
That's it. Keep going.
33. 30. 37. 34. 31. 28. 25.
Were you on? I think it's on 18,
And
15.
25. 25.
I think you went from 21 to 28. But 18. Almost there.
18.
Keep going. You're doing really well.
15, 12, 9,
That's it. Almost there.
3.
Perfect. Okay, now just rub your hands like this, if you can see me.
Okay.
Now just bring that memory to mind. And then when it's in your mind, I want you to go eyes all the way left, as far left as you can, and all the way to the right. Keeping your head still. Yeah, so imagine eyes all the way left, eyes all the way right. So again, eyes are going left and right, head staying still. And just hold it, the memory in your mind, and just go left and right, and count 10 left, 10 right. At some point, you may even notice the memory just goes blank, or feelings may start to shift. And after you've done left and right, I want you to go top right, bottom left, and just do it for 5. So top right, bottom left through the middle, top right, bottom left. Count that for 5. And after you've done that, just go in top left, bottom right, top left, bottom right with your eyes. And once you've done that, just let me know.
Yeah.
Okay, so take a nice deep breath. Let it go. So now we're just going to check in with it. So say, for example, we'd call that 1 round. I want you to close your eyes and bring that memory to mind when you was in the corner of your mum, and just see how your body reacts. Just listen to your body and see how your body responds to it this time around.
It's calm.
Say it again.
It's calm.
It's gone.
It's not in fear.
It's not in fear. So
Not
just listen to your body.
stressed, not anxious.
What can you feel? Can you? Is there nothing there? Is it just peace? What are you noticing?
There is a trembling in the chest, but it's fading.
Cool. So this trembling in your chest. What would you call that feeling?
Honestly, it's like the heart is trembling, you know.
Okay. So all I want you to do is this. Now we're just gonna. Hopefully, it should. Does it feel okay to sit with this feeling?
Yeah, it's okay.
So I want you to just keep rubbing your arms like this. I want you to close your eyes and just express it. So you can say, "I'm feeling this trembling in my chest," and that's okay. And just keep saying that, and you may notice it changes to a different feeling. Whatever you notice, just keep saying it. So say it out loud. Say, I'm feeling this
I'm feeling
feeling.
the trembling in my chest.
And that's okay. That's it. Keep saying it.
I'm feeling the trembling in my chest, and it's okay.
That's it. Keep focusing on that feeling. It may change to something else.
Trembling in my chest, and it's okay. I'm feeling this trembling in my chest. It's okay.
Now, what have you noticed with that feeling? Is that now past?
It's fading. It's
Cool.
turning into peace.
Cool. So just keep going until all the feeling's gone.
I'm feeling the trembling in my chest, and it's okay. And it's okay.
Now, did you just sense that shift? Did you hear your breath just go? Did you feel that?
Yeah.
Typically, that's what we're looking for, that parasympathetic change. Some people sigh, they may swallow, they may yawn, but typically it's that shift where your body finally goes into that parasympathetic, safe feeling. So now we need to just, what's 6 times 6?
6 times 6. This is funny. Good question.
Well, 3 times 3. It's meant to be difficult. You're in the wrong parts of your brain to figure it out, that's why. Or what's your phone number?
My favorite number?
Your phone number, your telephone number.
Phone number. 913-943-058.
Perfect. So, I mean, I'll explain all the different things that we've done. So when we was doing the humming activates your vagus nerve, which kind of switches on your parasympathetic nervous system as well. And it just pulls you out of the kind of different parts of your brain. Then same with the kind of eye movements, we're doing bilateral stimulation. So we activate different hemisphere of your brain. And at the end, when we're asking that question, we're asking it because we're putting yourself out of your limbic system, switching on your kind of prefrontal cortex, your rational thinking brain, which is why, sometimes these math questions are really difficult.
Yeah.
And sometimes if you've ever been in a position where someone's asked you a question, your brain just turned to mush, it's because you're in your kind of your limbic system, or even your anxiety responses, and your rational part of your thinking brain just switched off. So the reason why we ask those questions is to switch it back on again, and then we go back into the limbic system. So I want you to close your eyes and then think about that memory again. Now, as you bring that to mind, just listen to your body and just notice how your body responds this time around. Just think about it now. What are you noticing? How's your body responding?
Very calm.
Cool. Very calm. So I want you to just keep rubbing your arms like this for a second. I want you to just imagine you're looking at the younger you.
Yeah.
And imagine this younger you is now feeling calm, he's feeling okay. Now he's cleared the emotions. He's going to be seeing it maybe from a different perspective. Maybe he's not feeling so subjectively. He can maybe see it a bit more objectively. In this moment, he learned a negative belief maybe about himself or about his mum or about the world. What would be a more helpful learning that he could have learned if he didn't have the emotional expression that he felt? So looking back now with your adult rational mind, what would be a more helpful learning for him to have made in this moment?
That it's okay to not know the answer.
Perfect. Cool. So just imagine you're just communicating that to that younger self, and just communicate that to him. Just make sure he gets it and he understands that. And when he knows that, just let me know. Just having that little conversation in your mind, does he kind of understand that now, that it's okay to make mistakes?
Yeah.
Cool. So I just want you to just keep rubbing your arms and embrace him. Give him a big, big hug in your mind. And I want you and him to become one. So you're reintegrating this part of you back into yourself. And now you're going to take his place in his body now with your adult rational mind. And I want you to kind of rewind the scene, start the scene all the way back from the beginning. And I want you to experience it now through a different perspective, see it through a different lens, and then get through the memory to the point after where everything's okay. Whether it's a day after, a week after, a month after, or years after. Just go through the memory and keep going past the memory to the point where it's okay. And when you get to that point, just let me know.
Okay.
Okay, so how was your experience of it at that time? Was there a different experience going through the memory?
Yeah,
Cool. So what was your experience? What was your understanding this time around?
I was looking at the memory through the eyes of the position I was at that time, and I just understood the situation that my mom was going through. Um, and that it's okay not to know. It's okay to say you don't know. It's okay not to have an answer.
Perfect. So you see how when we use the bottom-up approach, when we create that safety to explore the feelings and we express the feelings, you get the answer yourself. We don't need to sit there and pick it apart. You already get the kind of all the knowledge that you need comes to you when you clear the emotions and use that bottom-up approach. Because I don't have the answer for my clients. So I'm not an expert on my clients. They're the experts on themselves, but I can lead them to understand and help heal themselves. So feel good?
Yeah.
So now if you
Thank you.
ever, you're very welcome. If you ever think about that same memory again, you will never be able to get those feelings back no matter how hard you try. But you may be able to think of many other imprints that you may have. But typically when I'm working with someone, the goal is just to work through as many of these imprints as we can. And say, imagine this is your kind of like your stress tank. If that's full up, you're just unloading all the old stress that you've ever felt in the stress tank. And it creates a more resilient response, but it also breaks the negative beliefs and all the negative kind of patterns that you've had. It breaks those patterns down.
You took me through two memories. So this one was the most important, but there was one before. And
So the early one that was blurry.
yeah, that one was like something of. I feel like I was a baby.
So with that one, can you bring that to mind now and see if that may be a bit different?
I don't feel the desperation I felt at the time.
Perfect. So you see how with very little information, I can help someone to heal their sort of traumas without even needing to know what the story was.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't sit here and spend hours and hours speaking about it. And, you know, whenever we're sort of emotionally triggered, the prefrontal cortex, the communicative part of our brain shuts down. And this is why many people, you know, don't seek talk therapy and things like that, because they find it very uncomfortable. They don't know how to kind of use that communication. Don't even know how to, I didn't even know what my feelings were when I kind of first started doing this, you know. I just knew that something wasn't right. But do you have any questions or anything about the process you just went through?
I kind of understand your the way you work with the feelings and the reactions of the person. Uh, honestly, I don't have questions. I just gotta say thank you.
You're
Really.
very welcome. You probably take like 24 hours for your brain to kind of put itself back together again.
I have a couple of questions on behalf of people who don't feel comfortable asking directly. So the first one is, what if you're in company and these feelings arise?
As in live in the moment?
Yeah, as in if you're like, what happens if you're in company and kind of like this, well, they haven't specified it in the questions, but I'm guessing like the anxious feeling arises, or some sort of panic arises, or something from childhood is triggered and it arises them to kind of want to get out of the situation, I guess.
So we always want to regulate. So in that moment, it's probably not the perfect time to explore, you know, if that's when we'd work together with someone, but we always want to regulate first. So the way that I regulate is just using your hands. It's very normal to kind of rub your hands like this, or even kind of just like rubbing just along your thighs, with a kind of circular motion. I noticed that I kind of use that a lot. Conscious breathing, you know, just being aware of your breath and just following the breath and just being with yourself. Because what it is when we're feeling overwhelmed and we're trying to escape, your body's acting as if there's a threat, but there's nothing for us to run away from or fight. So that we can't get rid of that kind of energetic charge. So we need to kind of teach the body that it's safe. Now we can't teach the body it's safe through the mind. You have to teach it safe through its body. So we can either do it through the breath by slowing down the breath, or just being conscious of it and just breathing into our belly, expanding. Slowing it down, so small opening of your mouth. But the easiest one is to basically just self-soothe with your hands and say, I'm feeling triggered right now. To express it and just to acknowledge it. When you're expressing it and you're acknowledging either verbally or physically, like your body's trying to express it physically, and it's often because you're feeling a certain way and you're suppressing it. You're not expressing yourself, you're not being authentic. That's often when anxiety will appear. And often we don't express it because we don't want the other person to also be triggered. Because typically what will happen is if I express my emotion, the other person is going to take it personally. And it's almost like, you're making me feel this way. Sometimes we do this. Sometimes this is how it plays out. But essentially what I would sort of advise someone doing is, start regulating yourself and just say, I'm feeling something arise in me. I'm feeling triggered and I'm noticing I'm feeling emotional. I'm feeling anxious, whatever this is. Now, I'm not saying I'm not directing this at you. I'm just saying this is how I'm feeling. And right now I need to just work through this, whatever I'm experiencing. And that's what we need to do, just regulate in that moment.
And what if that's in public though? Like, what if that's like, for example, on public transport or in a crowded place?
I would just rub your legs. I get it sometimes. I still get some social anxiety now and then, and I'll notice myself get a bit uncomfortable. I'll still talk, and I'll just be rubbing my legs. Or just kind of like rubbing your hands. It doesn't. People think it's going to be a lot weirder than we perceive. Like people think like someone's going to really notice you kind of rubbing your hands, but they really don't. Like I do it all the time, and no one ever questions it. But it's not ignoring it or suppressing it. It's actually kind of acknowledging it and even saying to yourself, I'm feeling anxious and that's okay. I'm noticing my heart beating out my chest and that's okay, while kind of regulating for yourself. But yeah, someone said a lot of people do these movements unconsciously. Yeah, a lot of people self-soothe. That your body has this like intrinsic intuition. It knows how to heal if we give it the right environment. And we all do this. We'll start self-soothing, or we naturally want to hug each other, and that hugging, that feeling held, that helps our body to regulate. Especially if we're hugging someone else who their nervous system is regulating, they're feeling okay. When our coherence, our energies are so close to each other, we regulate, we co-regulate with each other. Same way if we go into a room and someone's really, worked up and they're really angry, you like walking on eggshells, you feel it in the air. Versus someone that's super chilled, you just go in and you're like, cool, this feels quite relaxing,
Is there a way that we can access our own subconscious without having someone else guide us there, I guess? Like, can we actually access our own subconscious?
Yeah, we access it all the time. We often access it through our kind of dreams, things like that. Sorry, the dog's absolutely going crazy with fireworks. Hang on. Sorry, we're saying to access our own subconscious.
Yeah.
So most of our kind of shadows, it's just consciously being aware. So the three things you need to kind of explore your subconscious, I call them the 3 C's. So it's consciousness, so being consciously aware of it, compassion, so basically just not judging whatever you're looking to find, and curiosity. If you have those 3 C's, you're going to be willing to explore yourself, but your subconscious patterns will play out in your everyday life. So it's just observing your reactions, observing your stories. So everybody has a lot of stories. So these are the perceptions and thoughts that we have. Observing what your mind jumps to. Same way, if you're texting a friend and, you see they've read your message and they've not replied, and you see them posting on Instagram, and you're like, that bitch hates me, or that bitch is not, she doesn't care about me, blah, blah, blah. What those things are, those patterns and stories that come up to, they're projections from unhealed parts of us, or unhealed experiences we've had. That's why what we kind of reflect from other people, what we kind of don't like in them, or what our stories jump to, are just projections. We can only project onto uncertainty, which is typically a blank canvas. We project onto it with the information that we already have inside. And the same, just listening to your body. So when people call it subconscious, it typically just means your non-conscious mind. So you're not your conscious mind. So it could be your body, how your body reacts when you're in certain situations, when your body kind of tenses, when your body just shifts, and we're so disconnected from ourselves that we lack the awareness to even notice these subtle shifts in our body.
What about certain and like, for example, I didn't think that I previously suffered with any type of anxiety before. However, since moving to a different area, I struggle to come out of my flat. I know it sounds really silly, but I have become like a bit of a hermit. Like, I just want to stay in my comfort zone, and I get really uncomfortable when I have to come out of my flat. Like, where would that have come from? Would that be because it's something that's formed over like the past couple of years? It's not something that I've always had, or would that come from a childhood trauma, or is that something like from a more near trauma?
Us thinking about it is pretty much a waste of time and useless. What I'd essentially do is just get you to kind of feel it and explore it. So I don't explore my clients explore themselves, but as long as they're willing to kind of sit with the feeling, it's a bit like, if I like rubbed my chair, my sofa or something, if I looked at my chair and said, what does this remind me of? I would be thinking about it and I might not get to anything. But if I actually kind of sensory like feel it, like, oh, what's this feel like? Go, oh, what? This reminds me of this, or this reminds me of that. It's a bit like that. The feeling itself is the memory. So it could be, sometimes it is a pattern where it is something that we've kind of experienced before and our body's learned it. But sometimes it's more of a generalized anxiety. So it's just our overall ability to respond to just stress or just life in general. This is where we just need to build the resilience and just kind of retrain our nervous system through essentially kind of like exposure, but also then being able to regulate as we sort of go through it, but then also changing our perception, our belief in ourselves. So anxiety is often where, this is us and this is the problem thing. So the problem is bigger than us. So typically with a pattern that we're breaking down, we're bringing the problem down because we learned that pattern was really dangerous, but we also want to just build ourselves up, because if this is us, anything below our ability to cope is not going to create anxiety. Anything above that is going to create ability to create anxiety. If we have very, very high resilience to stress and our nervous system activation, anything below that is not going to create anxieties because it'll be within our capacity to cope with it. And doing things like, the cold showers, the ice baths, breath work, the regulating, and just basically having faith within yourself. But when you regulate through these experiences as you're going through life, you're teaching your body to be okay with it. So I still get activated, I still get sort of triggered, but through the regulation, through the breath work, through the kind of self-soothing, my body's learning, oh, I am okay in these situations. I can deal with this. And in your self-esteem and your kind of self-belief increases, and your ability to tolerate life increases as well. But it may, whatever it is, if it's only a certain scenario that typically triggers it, then I would sort of explore the pattern. If it's leaving your house, it could be, anything. And maybe there's a certain story that comes up. Often certain beliefs or certain stories that may be all encompassing, and things like something bad is going to happen. And we just test it by kind of saying things out loud. So do you know what the perception or the kind of thought process behind it might be?
I'm still trying to work it out. I mean, I do come out of my flat, obviously, like, when I have to, I go to work and it's fine and stuff. And when I'm out, it's fine. I think it's just like the whole thought of coming out, or I don't know. I think it's to do with like something to do with the area. Because I never used to have this where I used to live before. But yeah, as I say, I'm really into like pushing myself into my comfort zone, out of my comfort zone anyway. I still need to kind of work out where it stems from, but like I'm still pushing myself, if it makes sense.
So would you want to explore it?
Maybe not right now.
Yeah.
Possibly I would like to explore it, but.
So the idea is we have to feel safe. So that's why we always work bottom up. So we'd create a safety within, and if you felt safe, then you would then explore it, and it would lead you to where it needs to lead you. However, you may have learnt it, or maybe if you felt safe enough to just listen and be passive, maybe you get a certain thought come up, a certain idea, and it may give you the information that you may need. But you can speak to your subconscious directly. Typically I use like idiomatic responses, so you can kind of set up a finger for yes, set a finger for no, essentially kind of play like 21 questions, but you can also then use your subconscious to take over your voice and speak through you, but that gets a little bit kind of weird and a bit woo for some people.
We have a couple more questions here. So is mental imagery and energy healing also beneficial to trauma?
Yeah, but sometimes with the kind of the mental imagery things, you're still too cognitive. You're still too conscious. It almost has to be, it has to work on a non-conscious level. So say, for example, if I was working with a client in front of me, typically it's easy for me to regulate for them. And say, for example, we may trigger it, and then I may use kind of the eye movement stuff. And I'm looking for their body responses. So as I'm moving their eyes and their eyes are kind of following my finger or the light, wherever I'm using, their body will start to kind of shift or react through different parts of their vision. And then we would kind of work through those. And as they work through those, eventually their body will start to relax. So it's almost like it's completely non-conscious. We're working through the body rather than through the mind. Some therapies are just almost too mentally involved, but as long as it has a kind of like a somatic approach to it through the body, to can work. But the energy healing, I'm sure it helps. It's just not my go-to stuff. I've had Reiki sessions and things like that, so I'm not against them at all. But I only use what I know works. And if I'm not sort of some people are so stuck with their ego to certain things, like I've done this thing, oh, hypnotherapy is the best, blah blah. Literally anything I've done worked better than what I've done, I would use that. So I've done so many different qualifications in these kind of like change therapies. I basically just refined my process with what I know works, and created my own kind of method that I can just replicate results time and time again.
Okay, thank you. I just want to open up the floor again to see if anyone else actually wants to ask you any questions directly. You can come off mute and ask Shane some questions directly if you feel comfortable. No.
I think there might have been a question in the chat.
Can you find it?
So Aisha said, I'm learning to constantly be kind to myself. When I do my perspective changes and I'm able now to have an honest and caring conversation about the things I'm feeling. I've always been frustrated with not being listened to by others from childhood to present day. However, today when these things arise, I'm now listening to the child within and going through the steps with the knowledge I have now. I hope that makes sense. So this is a very common thing. This is why I say trauma isn't what happens to us, but what also doesn't happen to us. So sometimes it doesn't mean, we've had a terrible childhood, but maybe our parents just weren't present enough. They weren't, emotionally validating what we was experiencing, or we didn't feel supported and heard. And if we don't feel supported and heard, and we're not giving that space to express ourselves, and that attunement, we end up sort of holding those things and we end up learning to ignore ourselves. Because typically, the perception of how we was treated when we was younger, we then treat ourselves the same way. If we had very highly kind of critical parents, we're generally very critical to ourselves. We have more of that critical ego parent rather than the nurturing parent. But we essentially need to learn to reparent ourselves, not the parenting that we received, the parenting we needed. So just like Aisha was saying, we need to have that compassion. And we have that compassion, it's being able to just be consciously aware of what's happening. And every behavior you have, every response that you do, always has a good intention behind it. So always trying to typically meet a need. Sometimes this is an old childhood need. Sometimes it might be an adult need. But when it's a trigger, it's an unconscious pattern that plays out. Typically it's trying to meet a childhood need. Problem is a lot of the strategies that we're using are the strategies that we create as a child, and they're not so, not typically the best strategies we need as an adult. But being able to kind of acknowledge that, we can then acknowledge what the need is trying to meet and find a healthy alternative to meet that need. And when we can meet that need in a healthy way, we're being connected to ourselves. We're taking care of ourselves. And when we're being nurtured and being taken care of, our body only has to kind of whisper to us rather than shout. And people that experience high levels of anxiety and panic attacks is because we're not listening to our bodies, and our bodies just, kind of shouting at us because certain needs aren't being met, and we're not being authentic, we're not being expressive enough to get to meet those needs, either for us to meet them or for somebody else to help meet our needs with us.
Thank you so much, Shane. I really appreciate your time today. Just before we close, can you tell us what is the best way for people to get in contact with you? Should they want personal direct?
Typically through Instagram, so @anxiety specialist. So all one word, @anxiety specialist. On there, I've got my client reviews. So I always say, look, don't trust me. I could be kind of anyone. Go read what my clients have to say. So I think I've got over 100 client reviews of people that I've worked with. A lot of people kind of talk the talk. There's a lot of people out there that they could call themselves helping you with your mental health and all the mind sort of stuff. And the thing is, people mean well, but a lot of the kind of help that's out there, they're mostly kind of top-down therapies, and it's not really trauma-informed. And understanding mental health, if you want to understand mental health, you need to understand trauma, because really all mental health is unresolved trauma through various kind of degrees. And same with addictions. All addictions are just methods or a solution to trying to heal our traumas that we just don't feel comfortable being with or feel unsafe to experience.
Yeah, of course. Well, thank you again so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and coming on, explaining everything you do and giving some of the tools away as well to empower people as well. I'm sure there's going to be a few people that reach out to you directly, because there are a few private messages in here. But yeah, thank you so much. And thanks everyone for joining as well.
You're very welcome.
Thanks everyone. Take care.
See ya.
Bye.